I was blessed to watch this amazing video a while ago from Gaia.com, and I'm being led to share it with you today. Humans are in this war with everything, and truth is being censored everywhere. We were born to be free, and my purpose is to free one enslaved mind at a time, so that you too may remember. I appreciate every single one of you. For the full video, become a member at Gaia.com, where you too can expand your mind.
Samadhi is an ancient Sanskrit word for which there's no modern equivalent. There's a fundamental challenge with making a film about Samadhi. Samadhi points to something that can't be conveyed on the level of mind. This film is simply the outer manifestation of my own inner journey. The intention is not to teach you about Samadhi or provide information for your mind, but to inspire you to directly discover your true nature. Samadhi is relevant now more than ever. We are at a time in history where we have not only forgotten Samadhi, but we've forgotten what we forgot. This forgetting is Maya, the illusion of the self. As humans, most of us live immersed in our daily lives, with little thought of who we are, why we are here, or where we're going. Most of us have never realized the true self, the soul, or what the Buddha called anatta, that which is beyond name and form, beyond thinking. As a result, we believe we are these limited bodies. We live in fear, either conscious or unconscious, that the limited self-structure that we are identified with will die. In today's world, the vast majority of people who are engaged in religious or spiritual practices, such as yoga, prayer, meditation, chanting, or any kind of ritual are practicing techniques which are conditioned, which means they are just part of the ego construct. The seeking and the activity isn't the problem. Thinking you have found the answer in some external form is the problem. Spirituality, in its most common form, is no different than pathological thinking that is going on everywhere. It is a further agitation of the mind, more human doing as opposed to human being. The ego construct wants more money, more power, more love, more of everything. Those on the so-called spiritual path desire to be more spiritual, more awake, more equanimous, more peaceful, more enlightened. The danger for you watching this film is that your mind will want to acquire Samadhi. Even more dangerous is that your mind might think it has acquired Samadhi. Whenever there's a desire to attain something, you can be sure it's the ego construct at work. Samadhi is not about attaining or adding something more to yourself. To realize Samadhi is to learn to die before you die. Life and death are like yin and yang, an inseparable continuum, endlessly unfolding with no beginning and no end. When we push away death, we also push away life. When you experience the truth directly of who you are, there's no longer any fear of life or death. We're told who we are by our society and our culture. And at the same time, we're slaves to the deeper unconscious biological craving and aversion that governs our choices. The ego construct is nothing more than the impulse to repeat. It's simply the path that energy once took, and the tendency for the energy to take that path again, whether it is positive or negative for the organism. There are endless levels of memory or mind, spirals within spirals. When your consciousness identifies with this mind or ego construct, it ties you to social conditioning, which you could call the matrix. There are aspects of the ego that we can be conscious of, but it's the unconscious, the archaic wiring, the primal existential fears that are actually driving the whole machine. Endless patterns of grasping towards pleasure and avoidance of pain are sublimated into pathological behaviors. Our work, our relationships, our beliefs, our very thoughts, and our whole way of living. Like cattle, most humans live and die in passive subjugation, feeding their lives to the matrix. We live lives locked into narrow patterns, lives often filled with great suffering, and it never occurs to us that we can actually become free. It is possible to let go of the life that has been inherited from the past. to live the one that is waiting to come forth through the inner world. We were all born into this world with biological conditioned structures, but without self-awareness. Often, when you look into a young child's eyes, there's no trace of self, only luminous emptiness. The person one grows into is a mask worn over consciousness. When we are identified with our character, our persona, this is Maya, the illusion of the self. Samadhi is awakening from the dream of your character in the play of life. "2,400 years after Plato wrote the Republic, humanity is still making its way out of Plato's cave. In fact, we may be more transfixed by illusions than ever. Plato had Socrates describe a group of people who lived chained in a cave all their lives, facing a blank wall. All they could see were shadows projected on the wall by the things passing in front of a fire which was behind them. This puppet show became their world. According to Socrates, the shadows were as close as the prisoners would ever get to seeing reality. Even after being told about the outside world, they continued to believe that the shadows were all that is. Even if they suspected there was something more, they were unwilling to leave what was familiar. Humanity today is like the people who have only seen the shadows on the cave wall. The shadows are analogous to our thoughts. The world of thinking is the only world that we know, but there is another world that's beyond thinking, beyond the dualistic mind. Are you willing to leave the cave? To leave all that you have known to find out the truth of who you are? To experience Samadhi, it's necessary to turn attention away from the shadows, away from the thoughts, towards the light. When a person is only used to darkness, then they must gradually become accustomed to the light. Like acclimatizing to any new paradigm, it takes time and effort, and a willingness to explore the new, as well as shed the old. The mind can be likened to a trap for consciousness, a labyrinth or a prison. It is not that you are in prison, you are the prison. an illusion. If you are identified with an illusory self, then you are asleep. Once you are aware of the prison, if you fight to get out of the illusion, then you're treating the illusion as if it's real, and you still remain asleep. Except now the dream becomes a nightmare. You'll be chasing and running from shadows forever. Samadhi is awakening from the dream of the separate self, or the egoic construct. Samadhi is awakening from identification with the prison that I call me. You can never actually be free, because wherever you go, your prison is there. Awakening is not about getting rid of the mind or the matrix. On the contrary, when you're not identified with it, then you can experience the play of life more fully, enjoying the show as it is, without craving or fear. In the ancient teachings, this was called the divine game of Leela, the game of playing in duality. Human consciousness is a continuum. On one extreme, humans are identified with the material self. On the other extreme is Samadhi, the cessation of self. Every step we take on the continuum towards Samadhi brings less suffering. Less suffering does not mean life is free from pain. Samadhi is beyond the duality of pain and pleasure. What it means is that there is less mind, less self creating resistance to whatever unfolds. And that resistance is what creates suffering. Realizing Samadhi even once allows you to see what is at the other end of the continuum, to see that there is something other than the material world and self-interest. When there is an actual cessation of the self-structure in Samadhi, there is no egoic thought, no self, no duality, yet there is still the I am, anatta, or no self. In that emptiness is the dawn of prajna, or wisdom. The understanding that the immanent self is far beyond the play of duality, beyond the entire continuum. The immanent self is timeless, unchanging, always now. Enlightenment is the merging of the primordial spiral, the ever-changing manifested world, or lotus, in which time unfolds, with your timeless being. Your inner wiring grows like an ever-unfolding flower as you disidentify with the self, becoming a living bridge between the world of time and the timeless. Merely realizing the immanent self is only the beginning of one's path. Most people will have to experience and lose Samadhi countless times in meditation before they are able to integrate it into other facets of life. It's not unusual to have profound insights into the nature of your being during meditation or self-inquiry, only to find yourself once again falling back into old patterns, forgetting the truth of who you are. To realize that stillness or emptiness in every facet of life, every facet of oneself, is to become emptiness, dancing as all things. Stillness is not something separate from movement. It is not opposite to movement. In Samadhi, stillness is recognized to be identical with movement. Form is identical to emptiness. This is nonsensical to the mind, because mind is the coming into being of duality. René Descartes, the father of Western philosophy, is famous for the saying, "I think, therefore I am." No other phrase more clearly encapsulates the fall of civilization and the full-scale identification with the shadows on the cave wall. Descartes' error, like the error of almost all humans, was the equating of fundamental being with thinking. At the beginning of his most famous treatise, Descartes wrote that almost everything can be called into doubt. He can doubt his senses and even his thoughts. Likewise, in the Kalama Sutra, the Buddha said that in order to ascertain the truth, one must doubt all traditions, scriptures, teachings, and all the content of one's mind and senses. Both of these men started with great skepticism, but the difference was that Descartes stopped inquiring at the level of thinking, while the Buddha went deeper. He penetrated beyond the deepest levels of the mind. Maybe, if Descartes had gone beyond his thinking mind, he would have realized his true nature, and Western consciousness would be very different today. Instead, Descartes described the possibility of an evil demon that could be keeping us under a veil of illusion. Descartes did not recognize this evil demon for what it was. As in the movie The Matrix, we could all be hooked up to some elaborate program, feeding us an illusory dream world. In the movie, humans lived out their lives in the Matrix, while on another level they were merely batteries, feeding their life force to the machines, which used their energy for their own agenda. Always want to blame something outside themselves for the state of the world or for their own unhappiness, whether it's a person, a particular group or country, religion, or some kind of controlling Illuminati, like Descartes' evil demon or the sentient machines in the Matrix. Ironically, the demon Descartes envisioned was the very thing that he defined himself by. When you realize Samadhi, it becomes clear that there is a controller. There is a machine, an evil demon leeching your life day after day. The machine is you. Your self structure is made up of many little conditioned subprograms, or little bosses. One little boss that craves food, another craves money, another status, position, power, sex, intimacy. Another wants consciousness or attention from others. The desires are literally endless and can never be satisfied. We spend a lot of our time and energy decorating our prisons, succumbing to pressures to improve our masks and feeding these little bosses, making them more powerful. Like drug addicts, the more we try to satisfy the little bosses, the more we end up craving. The path to freedom is not self-improvement, or somehow satisfying the self's agenda, but it's a dropping of the self's agenda altogether. Some people fear that awakening their true nature will mean that they lose their individuality and enjoyment of life. Actually, the opposite is true. The unique individuation of the soul can only be expressed when the conditioned self is overcome. Because we remain asleep in the matrix, most of us never find out what the soul actually wants to express. The path to Samadhi involves meditation, which is both observing the conditioned self, that which changes, and realizing your true nature, that which does not change. When you come to your still point, the source of your being, then you await further instructions without any insistence on how your outer world has to change. Not my will, but higher will be done. If the mind only tries to change the outer world to conform with some idea of what you think the path should be, it's like trying to change the image in a mirror by manipulating the reflection. To make the image in a mirror smile, you obviously can't manipulate the reflection. You have to realize the you that is the authentic source of the reflection. Once you realize the authentic self, it doesn't mean that anything on the outside necessarily needs to change. What changes is the conscious, intelligent inner energy, or prana, which is freed from conditioned patterns and becomes available to be directed by the soul. You can only become aware of the soul's purpose when you are able to watch the conditioned self and its endless pursuits, and let them go. In Greek mythology, it was said that the gods condemned Sisyphus to repeat a meaningless task for all eternity. His task was to endlessly push a boulder up a mountain, only to have it roll down again. French existentialist and Nobel Prize-winning author Albert Camus saw the situation of Sisyphus as a metaphor for humanity. He asked the question, how can we find meaning in this absurd existence? As humans, we are toiling endlessly, building for a tomorrow that never arrives. And then we die. we truly realize this truth, then we will either go mad if we are identified with our egoic personas, or we will awaken and become free. We can never succeed in the outer struggle because it's just a reflection of our inner world. The cosmic joke, the absurdity of the situation becomes clear when there's a complete and utter failure of the egoic self to awaken through its futile pursuits. In Zen, there is a saying, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. Before enlightenment, one must roll the ball up the hill. After enlightenment, one must also roll the ball up the hill. What has changed? The inner resistance to what is. The struggle has been dropped, or rather, the one who struggles has been realized to be illusory. The individual will, or individual mind, and divine will, or higher mind, are aligned. Samadhi is ultimately a dropping of all inner resistance to all changing phenomena without exception. The one who is able to realize inner peace, irrespective of circumstance, has attained true Samadhi. You drop resistance not because you condone one thing or another, but so that your inner freedom is not contingent on the outer. It's important to note that when we accept reality as it is, it doesn't necessarily mean that we stop taking action in the world or we become meditating pacifists. Actually, the opposite can be true. When we're free to act without being driven by unconscious motives, then it is possible to act in alignment with the Tao, with the full force of our inner energy behind us. Many will argue that in order to change the world and bring about peace, we need to fight harder against our perceived enemies. Fighting for peace is like shouting for silence. It just creates more of what you don't want. These days there's a war against everything. A war against terror, a war against disease, a war against hunger. Every war is actually a war against ourselves. The fight is part of a collective delusion. We say that we want peace, but we continue to elect leaders who engage in war. We lie to ourselves, saying that we are for human rights, but continue to buy products made in sweatshops. We say we want clean air, but we continue to pollute. We want science to cure us of cancer, but won't change our self-destructive habitual behaviors that make us more likely to be sick. We delude ourselves that we are promoting a better life. We don't want to see our hidden parts that are condoning suffering and death. The belief that we can win a war against cancer, hunger, terror, or any enemy that was created by our own thinking and behavior actually lets us continue to delude ourselves that we don't have to change the way we operate on this planet. The inner world is where the revolution must first take place. Only when we can directly feel the spiral of life within will the outer world come into alignment with the Tao. Until then, anything we do will add to the chaos already created by the mind. War and peace arise together in an endless dance. They are one continuum. One half cannot exist without the other. Just as light cannot exist without dark, and up cannot exist without down. The world seems to want light without darkness, fullness without emptiness, happiness without sadness,